It's 9 o'clock. I think some people are still filtering in, but we've got a full agenda. So I wanted to why don't we jump into trying to talk about the Placer stuff, since I see most of the municipal people are on, and then we can switch gears. So I think several of the municipal economic development folks have been approached to do a demo for Placer.ai, which seems like it is taking cell phone data of various sorts and compiling them in some sort of a like GIS based portal for market research for businesses, that kind of stuff. Reed brought this to my attention, and it sounds like the software costs too much for most departments to be able to afford it on your own. So she was interested in seeing if we could at least chat about whether some sort of joint purchase, shared subscription kind of model would work. So Reed, I don't know if you want to say anything else to tee that up. Otherwise, I think for today, we're just sort of seeing if there's interest in looking further.
So we had met offline, a few of us, and I know, Sean, you had participated in the demo as well. And it was such a neat, we could use this information so bad. So I'll give you an example. They took a small space in Dover. I deal with mainly the downtown. So they took the downtown and compiled a whole report of just this tiny geographic area. You can pinpoint this down to even a few streets. So if you have a few coffee shops or a few stores, you can pinpoint exactly the kind of people that are coming into those areas, how much they're spending, what they're buying, their demographics on the people, household income. You literally can get every single thing that you could possibly want from all of this data. The other thing is that they can also tell you what kind of shoppers they are. So I had no idea that Dover has an enormous vegan population, and we hardly have any vegan options for restaurants. So that would be something, obviously, that I now know from this report that I got from them that that's who I'm going to start looking for next is a vegan restaurant. So this kind of thing is important for economic development. It's important for stores when you're talking to businesses that are looking to move here and you're trying to sell them on your community. This kind of data is critically important data. It would be so wonderful to help bring some people to the Seacoast. So James, can I share my screen so I can
you should be able to.
Okay. So let me see if I can bring up this first one. Can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So this was the one I was telling you about that they gave us that was a small little, we just did a small overview for downtown Dover. I asked them to run it. You can run it for any dates that you want. I asked them to run it for pre-pandemic to current, which obviously I did this demo in June. So as you can see, we picked a tiny little spot in downtown Dover to run this report on. When I did this, these were some of the metrics that I was getting. They told me how many visits we had to downtown Dover in that area, how frequently they were visiting, how long they were spending when they were here. And you can see the timeline. Obviously, everybody can probably see when the pandemic is. You can see the timeline. So it almost tells you too how quickly your economy, our downtown economy, is rebounding. I love that information because that's been really, really hard to track. You can also tell where they're coming from. So they show you a lot of people from Dover are coming to and from Dover. Some of them coming from Rochester. We're getting some from Newington. And it tells you in the geographic location, the number of visits and where they're coming from. So you can see, obviously, centrally in the red, it's high. So most of these people are traveling within this area, but we're also getting some from outside the area as well. Tells you the biggest days for downtown Dover, the busiest times, which I loved, because wouldn't I love to tell the stores what time to be open downtown? I thought this was great. How long they're staying here. So this was interesting too. So these are the favorite places of the people that they were tracking of where they go. Most of the people that are coming to downtown Dover also go to these top 10 places. So kudos, Robin, you're on there for Target and Somersworth.
Of course.
And this was cool because it shows me their journey routes. Now you can, as he was showing this to me, you can see more or less. You literally can pinpoint these reports and tailor them to exactly what you're looking for, which I thought was awesome. So as you can see, the visitor journeys, most of them, before they're coming to downtown Dover, they came from home. After they're coming to downtown Dover, they're going back home, the majority of them. So we have 61.8%, 64.7%. Work is another big one. UNH was another one. So Walmart was another one. And it told me the typical visitor persona for downtown Dover is typically white, between 75 and 100,000 a year for income. I know you're shaking your heads. I'm telling you, this was incredible data that I want access to on a regular basis. I think every economic development person wants this data. However, when I asked him how much it was, he said, it's about 20,000 a year. And I almost choked. I said, there's no way we can afford that. And he said, well, we can work something out with you. That was what he said to me. So I know we've worked with a few of each other on these ads. I feel like when I approach James, because I feel like this is a regional tool that all of us could use, I think that we should all work together to try to get some kind of program here so we all have access to this. And I think Placer would be very, very willing to work with us. I want to show you one other thing real quick. Wells right now is using this, Wells, Maine. They are using it to help with their tourism. So they did a tourist and visitation impact, which would be, even if we included Portsmouth and like, I'm sure, I don't know, James and I had like thrown that idea out there to include Rockingham County as well. But you can see it shows you exactly during their tourist season where the visitors are coming from. Look at how far away some of these people are coming from. I thought that was incredible.
We're still seeing downtown Dover.
Oh, are you? Can you
Yeah.
not see this? I'm so sorry. Hold on.
Hey, Reed, while you're pulling that up, there's a couple of comments about the tracking. And so full disclosure, I've gone through a couple of demonstrations. And the second one, I invited Ben Van Camp, who's on vacation this week. So we had a similar reaction, Sarah. It's a little creepy. However, to answer the question, and I think this is important for me, and I'm curious, people are going to feel differently about it, but they're tracking the mobile devices. So not, to your question, Warren, not necessarily people, right? There's no tracking device in people's arms. It's the mobile device, but it's so sophisticated that they literally can see where that mobile device is traveling from and to and how long, and then they aggregate all of the information behind, I guess, to get the demographics. And I think they make an important point about they're not using that information even themselves as, for individuals. I mean, that's what they say. So it's not like we would have some kind of a breach of confidentiality and all of a sudden, everybody's out there on the internet what they've done. But so all that to say, they're tracking the device, and the cool part is but based on when the device is off and how long it's someplace, that's how they're finding out where it quote unquote lives, right? To then extrapolate where your visitors are coming from, how long they're there, et cetera, et cetera. So just to try to address the creep factor.
Personally, I want to run a report to see every time Sean Clancy comes to downtown Dover.
Yeah, right. And
that would be never.
Yeah. So Warren, you have another question? Or?
Yeah. first of all, they're probably only tracking those of us that have location services on our mobile devices. So we're all allowing that to happen. So to me, the creep factor is really, if we don't want to be part of the statistics, we just take our location services, turn it off.
Yep.
The other thing I want to just, as a business advisor, this tool is tremendous. You know, just what Reed shared with us around times of the day, around the amount of visits over 5 years. Dover had 15.8 million visits. I mean, that's just incredible, and I'm sure you can narrow that down seasonally, and then I can help a client if one of the economic development directors gave you some of that information. I could help clients put that in their business plan, and well, this is the opportunity in this town, this is what we're seeing in this town, and this is the demographic. It'd be tremendous. And if the Seacoast region could put together, could buy in together with this would be tremendous collaboration, and small business would be very positively impacted, in my opinion.
Thank you, Warren. That was exactly my thought, because you and I think very similarly. I'm always thinking of how this could help a business owner. Believe it or not, the first time I heard of Placer was 4 years ago. And it was Doug Glennon that owns Jewelry Creations. Doug Glennon sent me Placer 4 years ago. And I tried to talk to Dan. Dan sat in on a demo with it too. And we both were very impressed, but then COVID hit and it kind of got lost. So when they reached out to me again this year, I was like, all right, this might be the time, because I am looking for rebound information from COVID. I want to know how much we've rebounded from COVID. I want to know where the businesses are. I want to know who is still coming down here and what we need to do to make it even better for visitors here. So when I looked at, I'll show you the one I looked at for Wells, Maine. Can you all see this now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So this was, they did a tourism visitation and impact report. I think Wells did some kind of deal with it, Placer, where they just wanted to get this information for the seasonal market that their tourism market. So you can see right here where all of the visitors are coming from, which was pretty amazing, and who is coming. So a lot of their tourists are coming from Maine and Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So they took this information and have since used this information that they got, and I think they did it in 2020. They took this information and are now working on programs to tailor their tourism economy to the demographics that they received from this report, which I thought was awesome. And that's only going to help Wells. So you could see here too, it tells you which restaurants they're dining at, which I thought was phenomenal. They're actually going to Portsmouth also. I feel like all of us could use this in some capacity. I always think of it from the business side, and I feel like giving this information to them would be enormous. We would then all be a huge resource for our businesses, our manufacturing companies, everything and anything. So if they're looking for employees, everything that we would have would be at our fingertips to help us sell the Seacoast better. So I just wanted to bring this to everybody's attention. I know that Sean and I had spoken about it offline a little bit, and we were both really impressed with it. I know that we can't afford it on our own, which is why James and I discussed it at lunch. And I just feel like maybe if all of us kind of pulled together, we might be able to get this done.
Do you get any sense, Reed, how much more they're going to want if they do say 6 towns, 8 towns, or whatever? I'm all in. This is great data, no doubt about it. If
Thank
it's
you,
not gonna
Darren.
afford it, I'm in.
No,
So it seems like there's some interest. I have a few ideas for next steps for how we can start to refine some of those questions. And I do want to keep us moving a little bit, because I imagine we're going to want to spend a fair amount of time on the housing stuff as well. So Noah, let's hear from you, and then we can talk next steps.
So just a question. I think this is really great data. Have any of you looked at, I know that there's obviously other kind kind of competing software packages out here. I know Esri Business Analyst has some similar data. I think there's other platforms out there. Has anybody done kind of a survey of what other kind of software packages are out there to really make sure this is really the best one? This is really the best, software that's going to have, is really going to work the best for all your communities, or that there could be something better out there? My other thought is, I don't know if this is really necessarily just, once we've identified the right software, whether it's really just a Seacoast thing or whether it could make sense to try to do some higher level, state level procurement to try to give this data to all the communities across the state.
That's what I was sort of wondering.
So hold on one second. Can I say something real quick?
Yep.
Once upon a time, you guys used to have, I think it was EMSI, and you used to run reports for us. The BEA did. And we lost that. I don't know what happened. I think you discontinued it. I'm not really sure, but we used to get quarterly reports from Marc La Liberté. Dover did. And I used to use those to send out to businesses. If we could have access to these instead of having you run reports for us, I think it would be much more efficient for all of us.
Yeah. So, and I'll just note, James mentioned that there are some specific next steps that we have to take. That includes going through procurement policies and competitive purchasing. So, already in the thought queue.
We would be doing that research about what other products are out there. We would need, if SRPC was sort of the central agency doing the procurement, we would need to be, getting the competitive quotes. If not, depending on what sources we were using, potentially even going out for a full RFP. I think in talking with Jen, we do not have the budget to be able to run this, purchase this consistently on our own on behalf of the region. So we would need to be talking about some sort of a cost sharing model that may or may not be flexible this year, depending on what our CARES Act ends up looking like, but no, probably not. Best case scenario, every once in a while, we might have some extra grant money, but it doesn't seem like we do right now. Sean?
James, just one last, I'll say last, just, I know you want to move on, but I specifically asked Placer about the workforce component of it, because you all know that's my passion here and so they have ways to use this software to identify where employees are coming from to specific employers. And if that helps them recruit differently or better or more efficiently, they gave us the impression that the software is that flexible that we could really, I think the workforce issue is not going away, right? So what do we have for tools or data to support our employers? I'll leave it at that.
I'm sorry, James, I know you want to move on, but I would just offer too, I can't help but have my Chamber of Commerce hat on, and I understand the conflict and too many cooks in the broth sort of thing. And at the same time, I think three of the chambers would find this invaluable, including the workforce data. And it also makes me wonder if some of the hotels and the hospitals would be potential underwriters.
And James, the last thing for me is that if you guys are going to do that work and find out, do the comparison and find out what is the best company, what's the best software, et cetera, please include REDC in that, or RPC, because obviously Sean, myself, and there are others who don't want to participate that aren't in Stratford County.
Yeah, definitely. That was also something that was on our radar, was that, we're not just going to do this and include you guys without talking to Tim and talking to Laurel. And, the more people who are interested in sort of figuring out how this is going to work, probably the easier it's going to come together. My thought for the best potential next step would be to set up a joint demo, so that anybody who is potentially interested in using this could come to one place, see the same sort of walkthrough example. And, we could also use that meeting as a way to talk through some of these details of, SRPC or RPC would probably need to use this tool to support all of our communities. So how do we do things differently in terms of, benefits for people who are actually paying in versus SRPC or RPC having to use this to benefit everybody, even those who aren't paying in? How do we work out who gets a login, what area is covered, how does all of that affect the pricing? Rather than speculate beforehand, just having somebody sit down with us so we can ask all those questions. Mike?
Yeah, thanks. I did this a couple of years ago, pre-COVID. We had a company, I forget which the company that we used, but it was very enlightening. Because we ended up giving them target places to look at, and we were trying to find out, where most people during the day come from, and if they're working here, they're living here, they're commuting. I'm interested in what sort of leakage we get. How much, how many workers actually leave the city as opposed to how many come in, and this and that. And it was very surprising. It showed that, if you were to ask me, what's the number one feeder to Rochester on a daily basis, what community? It ended up being Dover. 60% of all traffic coming into the city comes from Dover, whether that's for shopping, working, living, I don't know. But I found the information to be very good. And depending on what sort of deep dive you did, it could be very helpful to communities on all different levels. Like it would be a different thing to Sean than it would be to Darren, would be to Chris, to me, whatever. So please count Rochester in as far as, participant as we move forward.
So, yeah, I imagine I'll probably be sending this to the full list anyway, just to capture anybody who isn't here today. But can you just put your hand up that if we were to set up a joint demo, you would be interested in being part of that? That looks like just about everybody that's got their cameras on. So I'll just, rather than shift to a short list, I'll just use that full list and Reed, if I need a contact, I may reach out to you for whoever gave you the demo, and we can go from there. Sound good to everybody? Okay. So with that, Sarah and George, sorry to steal some of your thunder, but everybody should at least be pumped up and excited now.
No worries. That was fascinating. I'm thrilled to finally be talking with this group about this. I feel like at the past several meetings and maybe over the past few weeks, we've been sort of dodging the questions a little bit, not in an attempt to be secretive. We were just trying to work out the answers ourselves. We're building this grant program from scratch. So Sarah Wrightsman, I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at New Hampshire Housing. I don't know that there's anybody on this call that I don't know, but I just in case. As you probably know, we got $5 million from the governor as part of the InvestNH program for us to work with municipalities on their planning and zoning. And so figuring out how we were going to use that money, we ended up breaking it into two buckets, and we're going to talk about both of those buckets. Community engagement is going to be a big part of this program. So I want to get you some of this information, and I'll tell you a little bit about our partners too. So I'm putting the website in the chat. We're having a little bit of, so we're in the process right now of building an actual website. Right now, this directs to a page on our website. We're having a little bit of like a weird directing issue where it only directs to our website. Let me pull it up. Can you see my screen? Is it the website?
Yep.
Okay. I apparently have too many tabs open because it gave me a lot of options. If you don't type in the www before nhopgrants.org, it redirects to our homepage. If you put in the www, it redirects to this page on our website. You can get there either way. There's a button for it in this news and events. And there's also, if you go to the grant opportunities, you can find it that way too. So again, it's part of the governor's InvestNH initiative. We got $5 million. We're working with Plan New Hampshire. If any of you are familiar with the Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program, which I know some of you are, it's similar in some ways to that. You'll notice some sort of themes there, and cooperative extension. So the programs are being administered by Plan New Hampshire. Cooperative extension is creating the sort of community engagement part of it. And they've created, or in the process of creating, a housing academy. So what's going to happen is that folks who receive grants through this program will send representatives from their community, I think it's 1 to 3 for each of the programs, to go to this housing academy and learn and enhance their engagement skills and develop their community engagement plan. Meaning when you go into this program, You don't need to have your community engagement strategy totally like fully formed, which I think is a relief for a lot of communities who feel a little bit like they're not sure what to do with that. So we are hosting a webinar next Tuesday afternoon. It will be recorded. It's going to be a free webinar. We'll have the registration info out, and I'll send it to James to send to all of you once we have the registration link live about the grant programs. It's sort of like a grant writing workshop, so you can work through the details and the nitty-gritty of these grants. This will give folks, communities that are interested, a chance to look over the application instructions in the meantime. So I said we took this $5 million and we broke it into 2 buckets. So I'm going to talk about the Community Housing Navigator bucket, and then I'm going to let George talk about the other bucket, which is the Housing Opportunity Planning grants. So the Community Housing Navigators, and we'll give you just sort of like a brief overview. You all have access to this application instructions. The Community Housing Navigator grants specifically are for municipalities to hire local staff. So that would be like if the city of Dover wanted to hire a housing navigator, this is a person who works for the city of Dover that is just focused on housing. They can be working with developers. They are committed to doing some sort of like regulatory audit and needs analysis using the RPC's data. There'll be some synergy there, doing some regulatory development. Our goal, I think, is always to work with communities and changing their zoning. And so that's a big component of this. This is sort of like a one-off. The deadline for this, there's a limited number of grants. We're only giving out 6 grants. The deadline for this is September 30th. So it'll come up really quick, and we'll make the awards by October 14th. So this gives you access to a local employee to dedicate themselves to housing for the next roughly 2 years. We're on a crunch of sort of giving away the money and having it all obligated. The application information is here. So because we wanted to be flexible, we imagined this is a full-time employee who is working for a municipality, but we wanted to be flexible and create some opportunities for what about smaller communities that don't need a full-time employee or don't want a full-time employee. We created some flexibility in here for like joint applications. Say if 2 of your smaller communities got together, they wanted to hire each a part-time community housing navigator, make that one person, it's a full-time housing navigator, and the employer of that housing navigator is either the RPC or the coalition. So there are some options there. Again, we're only giving out 6 of these grants, but there are some options there if some of your smaller communities are interested in this. And that might be appealing to the smaller communities that don't have capacity necessarily to do this work. And again, I don't know if I switch tabs, if you can still see my screen. Okay. This is the application instructions for the Community Housing Navigator grant program. You can find that right here. And it goes through everything you need to know about the Community Housing Navigators. But of course, George and I and Tiffany McNamara, who's the executive director of Plan New Hampshire, who's administering this grant, are always available to answer your questions. And I'll put the email address for those questions in the chat too. George, what would you add? And then let's talk about the Housing Opportunity Planning grants.
Yeah, I think you covered that pretty well. And I think just again, the real point of these grants are really to try to get resources in the hands of municipalities. The housing is a regional issue. It's a statewide issue, but it's a regional economy. We get that. But certainly it's all about how do we empower communities to make the changes. Engagement part's really important because we see, the backlash of people who feel left out of this conversation and the stereotyping of housing, affordable housing, what have you, and misunderstanding and about housing impact on finances and revenues and expenditures and things like that. So, that's the thing, the Navigator program, we wish we had thought more, try to expand that, but we got to keep with the guidelines of the Navigator program that the governor and council signed off on. But we think it's a really cool idea. Anybody, do you want to do questions on the Navigator piece, maybe?
Sure.
Certainly, if there are any, I'll take them.
Does anybody have immediate pressing questions?
they're immediate and pressing.
Yeah, I don't see any. I know sort of going in my head, and some of the things we've been talking about in the background have been how can we collaborate regionally on this program? And we've had some conversations about, well, do we go after one of the housing navigators, either that lives at the Workforce Housing Coalition or at SRPC or at RPC, and conserve all of those communities that raise their hands. But we've also been talking about, well, would we submit an application for some sort of a joint project for the planning grants that SRPC or RPC might be the consultant for, and help multiple municipalities at once. And if we're doing either or both of those things, how do we pull those projects together in a way that makes them discrete and could get them through the application? So I don't need an answer to that right now, but if that's something that you might be able to sort of weave into what you're talking about as you're doing those grants or circle back to at the end, that would be helpful. Robin, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I have two very specific questions about the process, and maybe better towards the end, but wherever you feel comfortable with me asking those questions, I'd really like to ask those questions for Michelle. We have quite a few people who have projects in process, and these two questions seem to pop up for each one of them. Should I ask now, or should I wait, or what do you think?
Go ahead and ask him now, and maybe we'll hold them to the end.
Okay, so her first question was, is the demolition site specific, or can it be used on multiple sites? That's question one. Second question, does the project need to be approved by the planning board with permits?
So Robin, this is Noah
Really
Hodgetts.
yeah.
This is Noah Hodgetts. Robin, I think you're speaking of the other InvestNH programs. We're talking specifically about the planning and zoning program right now.
Okay.
I would suggest that you put those questions in email to InvestNH at livefree.nh.gov.
I guess this question has been put in InvestNH several times and no one's answering it. Is there like a human being that I could? I know, getting greedy in my old age, right?
Yeah, so I will put my email in the chat and make sure it gets passed on to the right folks to get you an answer.
I'll email you after then, Noah, if that's okay.
Yep,
I have your email address.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Sarah and George. Thank you.
Karen?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Sarah, I like James's idea. I think there's a lot more bang for the buck if we were able to have navigators and have folks that are looking at zoning look at it from more of a regional standpoint. I think there's just if we're able to say, okay, well, we're going to put someone in the Seacoast for RPC and SRPC, I think you're going to get a lot bigger bang. My thoughts.
Well, so we haven't told you about the other half of this grant program yet, but I will address the question about regional because it's a really tricky issue. And I can speak from my experience as the director of the Workforce Housing Coalition that the more regional you work, the less impact you have on individual land use regulations. And the reason why is because at the end of the day, it comes down to a local community voting on zoning changes. So you can talk about it as a region and you can connect as a region and you can share ideas as a region, but at the end of the day, your voters have to vote on changing your local land use regulations. And that's what makes the regional work so tricky. And so again, my experience as the director of the Workforce Housing Coalition was that technically I had 60-ish communities in my catchment area, which is all fine and good, but I'm really only effective in like 2 to 3 of them at the same time doing that community engagement work because it takes a lot of on the ground hand-holding community engagement work to get those zoning changes passed.
So what you're saying is you're looking for 6 communities that are willing to have their zoning changed and hire somebody and have that person work for them for a couple of years, implement those changes. So just 6 communities. That's where we're at.
That is only one half of the grant program.
Okay.
So let's move on and talk about the housing opportunity planning.
Well,
grants.
I just want to put a finer point on it. It can be more than 6 communities, and I think the point is well made. But let's look at it from the ground up. So, if 3 communities have a burning desire to do something in your catchment area, in the RPC's area or the coalition, that's going to be self-evident. The community is going to say, we want to do something. And just to be clear, the thing isn't, the whole idea is to increase housing supply. But when we talk about the 3 phases of the HOP grant, that's what a community navigator is going to do. It doesn't mean they're going to change land use regulations. That would be the hope. But it could be that they're helping navigate a development project that's going through that's having issues, like maybe the Pritos and Epping as an example. So it's got to be organic. And that's why I started this saying it's about communities. So if 3 communities seem to be wanting to do something and they're in a region, the RPC or the coalition, it might be a great person to do the application, but they're not going to do it for the community and say, here, sign this, because we're going to do this for you. It's got to come from the community. The housing academy is going to have people from that community. And then in the application, we'll say that if you want to do something jointly, the limit is 4 communities. And it gets back to what Sarah said. There's only so much resources. And, depending on the community, whether you're talking about Temple or Rochester, the amount of engagement and time someone's going to need is going to be the important thing. I mean, Temple might need a 40-hour-week housing navigator because they're dealing with a lot of issues around the conversation of housing. And so that's what's going to drive the application, the quality and effectiveness when we think about the scoring of it, which we haven't talked about yet. So that's part of it. And so, yes, it's going to be 6, but it might be more communities, but it can only be 6 grants. And again, the communities have to sign off on that and be part of the application.
So I could call Epping and say, hey guys, look, here's this tool. I think you guys need it. We need it. Let's team up together and do it. Type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. Thanks, Ben.
All right.
Can I just add, sorry, one more thing here and kind of, so OPD is also on the steering committee for this too. So and we helped kind of make sure everything kind of aligned with GNC approvals and such. But I'll just say that when we were thinking about Community Housing Navigator, it wasn't just about the regulatory change is obviously a really, really big part of this, but it's not the only part of the Community Housing Navigator part. It's also about the part of that, as Sarah said, is just having somebody on the ground to help make those connections, helping a developer. You have a new person who wants to do development in your town, trying to open those doors and figure out what's the process to go through. How do you kind of facilitate communities that are interested in increasing their housing stock? How do you facilitate kind of getting more housing built? Regulatory change is a part of that, but not the only part.
Well said. Absolutely. And thanks for saying that, because I think, this is built, while we did this from scratch, it's built upon the learning from the Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program. And one of the things that I was working on before that sort of was put aside because this program's replacing it is the MTAG, the assessment. Really, communities don't want to necessarily sign on for regulatory change because of all the things that go with it, but maybe they want to do an assessment of the regulations. Like, what are the barriers? It's like, that's a great first step. You do that with robust community engagement. Maybe you move on to regulatory change, but you can't make that happen. And my fear was that we wouldn't have communities if we did this MTAG just about, or this HOP grant just about regulatory change. There may not be a lot of communities that are interested. Interestingly enough, and Sarah, you may have pulled the thing this morning, but we had about 16 or 18 discrete communities that are looking to do some form of this, whether it's a navigator or one of the elements of the HOP grant. So, which I think is pretty interesting. And so with that, if I'm able, it doesn't look like I can share my screen. What am I missing? Yes, I can. I can do this. Don't laugh at me. Okay, sharing. Can you all see that? Oh,
Yes.
okay. So we know the background. Sarah already shared that. So, and we mentioned that the navigator, is trying to work on one of these 3 things. So when you see on the website, the 3 buckets of the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program is needs analysis and planning, regulatory audit, and then regulatory change. So, and again, you'll see the different grant deadlines, and we're accepting these on a rolling application basis. And the idea is to, if possible, a community might start with one, apply for another, or apply for a third, apply for all 3. We'll look at that as the steering committee. And again, just so people know, the steering committee is made up of, you're right, so it's Noah from Office of Planning and Development, us here at New Hampshire Housing. We have got Stephen Buckley from New Hampshire Municipal Association, and then we've got Molly Dunn from UNH Cooperative Extension, and Tiffany McNamara from Plan New Hampshire, as well as yet to be named individual from the Community Development Finance Authority. So, and we're trying to be very nimble, and the idea is the same. I think we're saying, well, how do we get to yes? And some of that is the back and forth as much as we can talking with communities beyond just their application. As Stephanie on the call will know, like we adopted that because Stephanie was on the steering committee of the MTAG, and we realized, you know, it's important, and so was Sarah, the last part, but no applications ever came. It's trying to have that conversation with communities so we understand that what they're trying to do and help get them to yes, and not get bogged down in application hell. So here's the first thing you see. So the needs analysis and planning. So again, and realizing that all the RPCs have been engaged in regional needs assessment, needs analysis right now, and that's due out in, you know, the end of this year. But maybe communities want to do a finer point on that. So understanding, mapping housing income, demographic data, things like that, to kind of look again at how are we trying to increase supply for our community. And looking at the master plan, again, it's not for a master plan update or redoing your master plan and its money. It's like, what is the issues around our and not necessarily the housing chapter, all things that affect housing and it's a barrier, and let's look at trying to draft those provisions. And then again, community engagement is going to be part of all three of these things. And just a note about that, we're not, Sarah and I and others talk about community engagement a lot, as opposed to just outreach and having a meeting or a survey, because we just see the impact of people with a good idea just getting pummeled because you haven't engaged in the community, or people come out at the end and thwart all efforts. And, you know, we think, without trying to be Pollyannish about it, that the more people you can pull in and have a conversation, it will, number one, inform the trajectory of even what you're doing with the grant, but it also invites people to the table, and we think that's an important thing, not to be kind of underdone. But to that end, and with the help of Molly, you know, we're gonna go with where community thinks they need to go. There's some communities that get that a lot better. There's some that don't, and that's what we're going back to. Again, we can have up to 3 people in a community go through that, housing academies, so that gives them the skills. Molly said that when citizens of a community go through that kind of training, they become real excited and interested in doing it. So we see a positive to that, not a negative. And how much engagement you need, it all depends on the sort of pulse of the community and what's happening. So I put a lot into the needs analysis and planning that's unrelated, but just wanted to talk about that engagement. Again, the rolling applications up $25,000, and so we, you know, reach our maximum allotted there. The audits are the audits. We've seen this up in the Mount Washington Valley region. They spent money to do an assessment of their 13 towns, and it was really interesting to look at, you know, what's getting in the way of our housing production, and it gets into the economics of development and other aspects. And so, to me, I'm excited. I hope communities that haven't done this really think about this. Again, with engagement, it's a great opportunity to say, you know, what are we learning through this? How do we talk about it as a community? And then maybe they may then want to apply for regulatory development. And that's the third sort of tranche in this. And that's exactly what it is. How do we sort of rewrite some of our language to make housing supply you know, work better? And again, I just draw on some limited experience from the field, like in Conway, changing, you know, including inclusionary zoning, doing a cluster zoning.
George, hang on.
Yeah.
George, can you scroll down so we can see the whole document and the other information? Can you scroll
I don't know
up?
what you're saying, Rob. Like, what do you, Tim?
George,
Are you scrolling your screen?
Are you scrolling? We're only seeing the very top of the first page of the HOP grant application.
What about now? You're in the regulatory audit?
Still on.
No.
Oh,
sorry.
Gotcha. Why is that not happening?
Maybe if you share the screen instead of like the window.
Hang on a second.
When this happens to me, I unshare and then share that particular screen again. That normally works.
When it happens to me, I scream and yell.
I know that works too. I'm now in.
Sorry, George.
I'm now in. I'm going to ask Sarah to take over because I have to. I don't want to waste people's time. Can you just continue on while I? Am I still sharing? Because I can't seem to.
Yes.
Yeah, you're still sharing. All right, I booted you.
Here we go. I'm gonna. Okay, good. Go ahead, Sarah. Thanks.
Okay. Do you want to keep talking? I can share and scroll.
Go up to the regulatory audits, which is where I think, I don't know what people saw, but so did people see scroll up a little bit more? Did you see item 1? That's the planning and zoning that I talked about. So if you haven't seen that, everything I was just talking about relative to master plan and other things is there, community engagement. And then scrolling down to the regulatory audit, which we think is really good. And again, just some ideas there that we've put in, that it's not the exhausted list, but looking at your barriers, outdated regulatory schemes, your processes. Do you have a bond requirement that might be really a barrier to starting any kind of housing project, or so things like that. And there's the deadline there again. So the deadline is pushed out. So the first one for the housing assessment was an earlier deadline of January 27th. The last time we can accept that of 2023, and then this one is June. And then going down to regulatory development, and that's again just some bullets of what that might be, changing subdivision site plan regulations and the like. And those grants are up to $100,000, and that the applications are accepted to November 15th, 2023. The bigger thing is we've got to spend this money by, we have to spend it by September of 2024. So that's why things are really kind of contracted. I don't want to go too much into the use of grant funds, but again, it's to hire a consultant. We're going to need that. And to that end, we're trying to get a list of, we're asking RFQs from consultants to send it in so they can send us in a statement of qualifications. We'll have approved consultant list. The RPCs are automatically part of that. So all of them are approved lists. But we're trying to get people that have been consultants and not necessarily in New Hampshire, but maybe New England. There are some that worked in communities. And again, we invite your input. If there's consultants out there, that you know of, that might be good. It's great to have the RPCs, as the go-to. We are a little bit concerned about capacity. It's not like the RPCs are sitting idle. And so, and again, we've got this influx of interest, right? If only this would have happened in MTAG, there's at least 16, 20 communities that are looking for some kind of grant. So the good news is that, that first tranche, I think, is going to be pretty robust. And getting back to the Housing Academy, which is going to be a combination of in-person and virtual, we might have a really good cohort in this first go-round, getting the community engagement training. So the scoring criteria, we talked a lot about this. There's 4 sort of buckets: clarity of the narrative, the goals, the expected outcomes, consistency with the purposes of the grant phase is sought, and the willingness to develop and implement community engagement plan. Again, as Sarah said, we're not looking for a fully fleshed out plan, and we think that's a good idea because, but just I think it's the commitment or willingness, and we'll sort of see that come forward in our conversation and in the grant application. And then the clarity and confidence, scope, and the work budget. So, the outcomes really are that, like, how are we looking? If you're doing regulatory audit, the outcome isn't like, well, we want to find out what our barriers are. It might be like, we want to find out our barriers and then figure out what we're going to try to do about that. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but that gets to, I think, the quality of the grant application. I don't think we want to go through preparing the grant application, but just say, we've got outlines. You can just slowly scroll through it, Sarah, maybe the cover page. Oh, that's all right. The cover page. And then, we're talking about, what's your application area, the housing challenge and goals, outcomes and deliverables, scope, work, and budget. And then we've got a budget template. And what I'll say about the budget is, getting back to community engagement, we've automatically put $2,500 into everyone's grant application. So if you're asking for $40,000, you're going to get $42,500, and you can use that money for community engagement work. And what we're trying to do is have people not worry about the resources to do community engagement. And the thinking might be, if you're trying to reach people, young families, are you paying for babysitting services? Are you renting a place that you can go to that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have this money? I keep using the ice cream truck. That brings people. Maybe you got to hire an ice cream truck because you're doing something fun. Just be creative about that. And Molly's going to try to put some resources together on our webpage about that. And you can ask for more than 2,500 if you've got a really good idea of what you want to do with community engagement. We're also with the Housing Academy allowing, so we know there'll be some like citizens that are maybe they're gainfully employed elsewhere, but they're using their volunteer time. And so we want to put a stipend in of $250 per attendee. So it wouldn't be municipal staff that would get paid, but you've got people in your community that are volunteering to sort of help do that work. They'll get $250 to kind of go through the Housing Academy and do that on the ground work in their community. And then administrative costs, we're allowing up to 7.5% of the total project cost. So I think those are a couple of good things to kind of add in there. The rest you can read through, and as Sarah said, we're putting together, and Sarah's already started this, a list of FAQs for people that have questions, so we can roll that out. I don't want to say we're building the airplane as we're flying it, because we had some good, I think, background, but we are trying to make sure, and as actually Ben and Sarah and I have gone through it, we've been trying to sort of truth test or field test, how does this really work in real time? And so it led us to getting to some good answers, but I'm sure there's many more questions out there that might help us better articulate the purpose of the grant program. But I think I'll leave it at that. You've talked about the webinar. We're trying to get the list of consultants together and compiled. And I think we have a no later than date, and I forget what it is, but I think it's the end of this month or something. I've mentioned the Housing Academy. And then, questions can go at info@nhhopgrants.org, and that's on there. And then our website, which still right now you have to do www, but got some good information there.
So George, a question from Tori in the chat. Is the Housing Academy training going to be available for just anybody to register for, or is that only going to be for people who have received an award through either the navigators or the HOP grants?
Yeah, well, it's really going to be for the people that have received the grant. They'll get money to do that. It's an interesting question. If Molly was on the call, she'd be like, I'll take anyone. So I kind of would, because, could be really great. I went through the Engagement Academy with UNH years ago. So I don't have an easy answer to that. I think if there's a lot of people, then we're going to have to limit it. Because again, that first tranche, if communities follow through, there's at least 20 or so now that are interested. That could be 60 people if everyone brought 3 in a community. And I think that would be a full lid for the Academy. But that would be a good thing for Molly to think about in the future of doing it, because she's done this before. Like, they've offered that as a program. And I think if they were able to offer that again for anyone to join, that would be great.
Yeah, and I'm not.
There is some opportunity, I'll just add, to like loop in, say, I'll give an example, like if the city of Dover applied for a HOP grant to do something, and say Donna Benton went as the planning director, but she also brought along a planning board member and like just a citizen who's super engaged, that they have that sort of freedom to bring in other engaged citizens in those communities. Then you have people who are sort of carrying the torch on that community engagement work at the local level. So it's just grantees for now, but yes.
And I wanted to add, so just to talk about cross-pollination of grants, a community could get a community housing navigator and also apply for one of the 3 HOP grants. Want to make sure that was clear. And that gets back to, we've got a job description or statement of sort of qualifications for a community housing navigator, and it's not someone necessarily that's a professional in planning. Like, that's the opportunity for the consultant to be hired. This is a person who's trying to navigate, and it's there for a reason. How do I navigate in the community, connect people with issues? And then when we go to try to do an audit or change regulations, you apply for money, or maybe the town has it, but their HOP grants are available to apply for and get that money to get a consultant in. So that would be the best, right? You've got a navigator, and then you're using an RPC or some other consultant to kind of do the technical work of regulatory audits or change.
So,
Robin, you said, yeah.
So applying for both of those programs not only would not hurt you, but it sounds like you're actually viewing that as a positive of you're submitting both for a navigator and for these other programs.
Yeah, it's positive. I think if they weren't applying for a HOP grant, if they're okay, if they were,
Sorry, I just need to get
you-
up and dance every few minutes to keep the
yeah,
lights
that's
on.
really cool. Very good. I thought you got swallowed by the sea that's behind you. That tide came in. So I think that whether they apply for a HOP grant or not, the detail in the Community Housing Navigator grant that talks about we're trying to do needs analysis, regulatory change, what's written in there regardless will be what helps that community get the grant. So that gets back to, but your point, it's a good point. I was saying that to Robin, we don't really have we're not doing a PowerPoint presentation today. All that stuff is scrolling down through the applications and stuff. So it's all just on the website. Okay, other questions?
Other questions for George and Sarah? So George, you said it real quickly, and it was the first time I heard it. So I just want to have you say it again for everybody. So when you're talking about the navigator's position, you said there was a cap of they can't serve more than 4 communities?
Correct.
And would you, I assume, would probably be looking at like joint applications for HOP grants similarly, that there would be an upward cap on who could collaborate on something?
I think that in the HOP grants, they might do that, but each community is going to be applying for a grant. I mean, Temple, Peterborough, and Swansea might all apply for their own HOP grant, but they may want to all use the same RPC. So we don't see it the same way. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but there aren't joint applications for the HOP grants necessarily.
So for the HOP grant in our region, the Tri-Cities, Rochester, Somersworth, Dover cannot submit one application. They would have to submit their own applications and just agree to cooperate or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're not trying to make it difficult. I think that if that's happening and they all know they want to use, so are you saying that they all know they want to use the RPC, let's say?
So right now we've had conversations with the county and sort of various communities filtering in and out, talking about how can we try and get everybody in the region on board in terms of, trying to use this money, work together, work, towards building more housing in the region. And there has been some momentum behind filing one application that's a joint application for whoever's interested. We haven't worked out the details. We were planning to reach out and sort of get a sense of who wants to do what, and then maybe we'll start building a project or playing matchmaker. But I think this was something that like the directors have been expressing to Commissioner Caswell, that we're concerned about our capacity. And if there's a way for us to serve multiple communities as part of one project, so that we don't have to leave people behind, that might be the only way we can get it done.
My question is, what are you going to get done? I'm unless you're talking about needs assessment and maybe an audit, where community engagement is important, but you're not trying to change zoning. Like, I don't know how you can be more effective in multiple communities with one application if you've got a capacity issue. And again, I at the risk of using the same communities, like I won't name a community. I'll just say, you could have a small community that needs a lot of on the ground work because there are people that are adamantly against more housing. So if you're trying to do regulatory reform, how do you put, you've only allocated 5 hours a week there because you get 8 grants you're working on and 40-hour person that you've hired. Like, it's 5 hours a week and work. I get back to Sarah's thing and our funding of regional housing coalitions. We've been pounding them for years. Like, I know you're a regional housing coalition, but the action happens locally. There may be some regional stuff, but most we hear, Exeter wonders why Stratum isn't doing something. That's not going to change Stratum zoning. Stratum people are going to have to change it themselves. And how are you, as a consultant, going to ensure that happens? That's my concern about any joint application, whether it's a housing navigator or a HOP grant. it takes so much time and effort to change things. But I think if you're saying a housing needs assessment, maybe that's a little bit different. Maybe capacity can work. And I think we would look to you to clarify that in maybe a pre-conversation about that. Because if it makes sense, we want to entertain it, right? Like capacity is a big deal. So if you've got limited capacity, you try working. Yeah, go ahead.
No, George, let's put the capacity piece aside. I don't think that's really that much of an issue. I think, just along these lines, I think the only thing that really could be done on a larger number of municipalities, single consultant, is the audit piece, and just looking at the Mount Washington Valley example. I think that would be a really good example where you could get more, if everyone was looking just to do some audits, you could get more communities together, and it would actually have a cost savings to do iterative housing regulatory audits. And so I think that would be one that would be a really good example where it might be worthwhile to say you could have collaborations of greater than 4. But it would be kind of limited in scope to that.
Right. I think the other thing I'd add is that George and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe we did talk at an earlier stage about basically bundling. If we get multiple municipal applications that plan to use the same RPC, we could potentially bundle the approval of those applications together. And so, while they could still be, in James's reference, 3 separate applications from the Tri-Cities that are all going to use SRPC, you could, potentially spread your overhead cost or such across those applications. And we could, while they would on paper still be 3 separate applications, we would kind of be...
The administration is reduced a little bit.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the Housing Navigator, these joint applications, they're joint, but, each community is kind of its own application. And we went back and forth about the word count. Because I was saying to Sarah, well, 250 word count for this particular section for one town, shouldn't it be 750 for 3 towns? And it's because, again, maybe it's regionally done, but it's about every community's unique issue, what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Makes sense.
So if there are other questions, I know that Sarah and I have to go to another meeting, but we could, you could send them and we will answer them. But I think that last piece was really good. That's the getting to yes. We want to be open-minded about that and make sure that it works. And so, as Jen mentioned, the audit, and that's in my mind what I thought would work. That's a great way to kind of use funds in a good way that's cost-effective and actually effective in the community work.
Yeah. And do send questions as they come up. And if you have them, it helps inform our FAQs. I know we're running a little bit over, so I don't want to neglect any questions, but I also don't want to hold anybody.
Yeah, I don't see anybody with any pressing hand waving or anything. If you don't have Sarah and George's contact information, let me know and I'd be happy to get that out to everybody. We can also make sure we get it in the notes. So anything final on the housing issue? I see George is dropping his contact info in the chat as well. So a few quick hits. If you remember all the way back to February, March, when we were discussing the Cedars funding application, we have finally heard from BEA about moving that forward and contracting. So we're still in discussions, but we're tentatively looking at September governor and council meeting. Jen?
Possibly not.
Possibly not.
So there have been some issues with the contract. And so the contract came back and it had our entire scope of work in it, but it did not have our entire budget in it. So I've been going back and forth with Mikhail and the staff at BEA. Mikhail had to leave here for another meeting at a 2-hour drive ahead of him. So he had to step off before we got to this here on the agenda. So he and I are going back and forth to try and refine that. I think what's going to happen here is something we don't know. It was kind of, you know, for the BEA folks that might still be on the call, you know, earmuffs. It was a bit of a black box when we submitted things. So we don't really know what the decision-making process was or how things happened. We just got contracts. In that decision-making, it looks like on our project 3, which was the micro grants, in the micro grants, we had 2 tasks. One was going to be $2,000 that was going to go towards John's school program. So that was in there, but the balance of the $5,100 to do additional micro grants, that $5,100 was not in the contract total. So it's looking like right now, best Mikhail could piece together was that the decision makers didn't fund that task because it wasn't concrete. We hadn't identified who those micro grants were going to. However, it was in the scope of work. So not really sure. Doesn't sound like we're going to get the other $5,100. At this point, we've amended the scope to just eliminate that task. So we have everything but those couple additional micro grants in the scope of work. However, the last thing I heard from Mikhail before he had to step off was that there could be something else in the contract that needs to be fixed that would not just impact us, but all of the Cedars and their contracts. So that they're working through with the Attorney General's office to remedy. And so stay tuned. That's all I have there.
Up here. Sorry, Mike Babinski's here. Is the Route 108 meeting a Teams meeting or did it get rescheduled? Anybody know? I can figure out with Colin in a second then.
Colin's on vacation.
Oh, right, he is.
Okay,
So yeah, if it was going to be with Colin, it's not going to be this week.
Thanks.
Good to see you, Mike.
Yeah, good to see you, Jen.
Mike Babinski says hi, everybody. So the deadline they gave us of today too appeared to be a BEA deadline, not a governor and council deadline, because they only have one meeting for August. So it looks like the actual hard stop submission deadline is next week from GNC's end.
Yeah, but the issue with that is it still has to go to the Attorney General's office for review before it can be submitted for GNC.
Okay.
So.
The only other thing that was sort of on my radar, Robin, you had been talking about that interview opportunity that you were approached with, and this is probably mostly the municipal folks that would be in this. The Asian publication that approached you about an interview and potential sponsorship opportunity. They were just looking to write an article about New England and direct foreign investment in New England. So I don't know, Robin, if you want to chat about that and see if any of the other municipal folks are interested in, taking that meeting or not.
Yeah, I haven't heard from anyone, so I'm kind of reading between the lines that it's not a good match for everyone. So, and if I'm correct with that, I'll send an email back this afternoon and say, thanks for thinking of us, but it's not going to work right now. Please reach out in the future, sort of thing. Does that, I see everyone nodding yes. I just didn't want to overstep boundaries and say no if we wanted it, and I didn't want to say yes if we didn't, sort of thing. So.
Anybody absolutely dying
I'm not
to take that
seeing
meeting?
a lot of, wait, stop, don't stop them.
Okay.
I think I'll stop them. Okay.
Paul said in the chat, Newington got the same invitation, so.
Good.
probably
Yeah.
just sort of generally reaching around and seeing who would be
I
willing
think
to.
they, of
to talk
course,
to them.
they're international. It's so small. They see it as an entire area, not one community, you know, like we.
Right. All right, that's all I've got. Anybody have anything else for the group?
Real quick, James, can I just pop in? I threw you a whole bunch of information to
Yep.
share. I don't know if anybody saw WMUR this morning, and they had the New Hampshire Department of Education is partnering with businesses across New Hampshire, especially I think this would help childcare businesses. I know Rochester Child Care Center partnered with them. They are starting a program where they are paying for half of the cost of interns to come into businesses. So if somebody is getting paid $15 an hour, the New Hampshire Department of Education will pay $7.50 to the business to cover half of that cost for businesses. So anybody that has childcare centers or even restaurants that are looking for kitchen help interns, I think there's a link. I sent it to James. You can send it out to everybody for businesses that they can go and sign up to become part of this program.
Yeah, so I can definitely, there is so much stuff in this chat today that I may not even wait for it to get put into notes. I'll just send you all the raw version and we can polish it up over the course of the week. But if we want to spend some time on that on the call in 2 weeks, that works for me. Anything else? All right, seeing none, thank you all.